Okay, so next item here. I guess there's a new list. There are new forms of blacklist coming out in different ways. And Matt, can you tell us a little bit about this new one that's come out?
Sure. So abuse.ch has been around for a while. They're most well known for the Zeus tracker list, where they track the different locations of known Zeus command and control. It's been very helpful to us, I know. They've just released a new blacklist. They're calling the SSL Blacklist. And what they're doing is they are publishing the SSL certificate information for known malware command and control. So if you have the ability to detect SSL certificates as they pass across the wire, you can say, almost without a doubt that these certificates are malicious, therefore the traffic they're protecting is malicious, and you can ban them from your network. The list is sort of set up, it's biased towards using Suricata, which is like Snort. It might actually be a fork of Snort at some point.
Yeah, I don't recall, but you're right. It has maybe some basis in that originally.
So it's meant to be used with an IDS that has the ability to look for SSL certificate information.
Okay.
They're actually publishing the SHA-1 hashes of those, as well as the a couple bits of metadata that you would look for, like the name of the company,
common name,
exactly,
things like that inside the certificate.
So the list is available online. They've also got a secondary list if you don't have that capability to use. They're actually tracking the IP addresses that they've associated with those same certificates, which is okay if that's all you can really use in your environment. I would personally would feel better if I would recommend that you use the actual signatures, because those command and control points are going to change over time. Those IPs might get recycled, they might get cleaned up. But if you're using the actual SSL certs, that's almost 100% certain that what you're looking at is malicious if you find it.
Well, presumably in this case, the private key holder of those certificates is the bad guy, right?
Presumably, yes.
And so nobody else theoretically should have it. And so having presented that certificate in an SSL session, it would be a pretty strong indicator that you're talking to a bad guy.
Right. So they're actually collecting for some variants of Zeus, Kins, Shylock, and I want to say ThreatTraq is the other one.
Okay.
And I expect personally the list to expand in different families as they continue this. It's been out for less than like 24 hours at this point. So I'm sure they'll work on it.
Okay.
And to your point of IPs changing a lot, I did check probably like the most recent 20. None of them are still up. So, because I was trying to go grab the certificates, to maybe try to figure out if I could do something with our own detection stuff to look for the presence of these certificates, other than the SHA-1 sums.
So a lot of them have been taken down, but they may have migrated to different servers.
They may have migrated someplace else.
Places.
And the thing to keep in mind, the common name or whatever the domain name is that's listed in the certificate, there might not even be one in many of them, doesn't necessarily indicate the domain that they're using to resolve to go get to that command and control. So it appears that the ones that are on the list, as far as I was able to determine, are not alive anymore, not up. And they probably moved someplace else, but I'm not quite sure where they've moved to.
Okay.
But irrespective, they could still reuse those certificates anywhere, because it's not necessarily tied to a specific IP address or anything.
Well, that's the danger of a public blacklist like that, is as soon as it becomes public, it becomes known to the attackers as well. So if they can set something up that says, okay, well, this certificate's no longer any good to us, this one isn't either, they can cycle through. So it's going to be a cat and mouse game, but it's good to at least have these, for the good guys.
We're going to set you up with a couple of questions here. First of all, why not just revoke the certificates?
Well, they're not through like a real certificate authority, so you can't, go to them and get a certificate revocation, list for these. They're self-signed certificates. That's another thing also that you could be looking for in the certificate chain. Is if you have a means to do this, there aren't many appliances that I know of that can do this, but maybe some proxies and whatnot can. Look for, when the certificate comes back, there'll be some kind of certificate signing chain in that certificate, and you can see, well, this is a self-signed one versus one that's signed by VeriSign or someone that's trusted, which might be a tip-off that, hey, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a rogue site necessarily when you see SSL certificate that's self-signed. But it's one of those indicators where all of these, as far as I was able to determine, are self-signed. I don't think any of them were, signed by an official SSL, signer.
Well, we've certainly seen cases where they were signed by valid authority, but they were expired and perhaps stolen in some cases like that. So there are other scenarios that could exist. I think this is perhaps just in its infancy, and or hopefully the intent is to expand this to other types of certificates used in malicious circumstances going forward. So the next question is, how the heck can you see this if SSL is encrypted? I know you're thinking, why is Brian asking these goofy questions?
Well, you can. I mean, so when you first do the SSL exchange, the first thing that the server is going to send back to you is the public part of the certificate.
Yeah.
So that is actually clear text. It doesn't look clear text on the wire, but certain components of it will be clear text. And that's what your browser actually ingests and says, okay, here's my certificate. This is how I'm going to go encrypt this traffic to the endpoint. And then he uses the private part of the key to decrypt. And then you go back and forth that way. So the very first part of that session setup of your SSL session that is transferred in the clear, if you have an appliance that can recognize that that's happening and maybe save off that certificate or do some analysis of it, you'd be able to tell, okay, this is one of the ones that's on the list here. It's got the same SHA-1 or maybe the certain components like the common name or the subject, or there's a couple other fields in there that are in this certificate are match what are in there. Although there's a lot of in the list there that are using the defaults. Yep. So when you go to use OpenSSL to create your own certificate, they give you that internet widgets PTY something, and people just hit return, and there's a bunch of certificates like that on the list. So you really need to look at that SHA-1 which would be unique. That would very accurately specify that this is the certificate that they're talking about that you're also seeing.
Okay. So last question here, again, another setup here. Why doesn't the browser just tell me that I've got a bad certificate, it's self-signed? And usually I get that pop-up that says, go ahead, Matt, it's yours.
I'll take this one. John's been taking all the fun ones. Because this isn't a browser. This is malware communicating back and forth. There's no indication to the user that this malware is even installed on the machine, so your browser will not have any way to warn you.
Right.
It's really between the malware and its home that the whole thing.
So that's why it's important that we get into the network in this case. We can't depend on the end computer because it's got some malware installed, and this is actually one mechanism to try to identify that you've got malware on your environment. The fact that that certificate's being being accessed, most likely an indicator that the client side has been infected, and you need to go and remediate that problem.
Yep.
All right, good deal. Okay, so that's
the one last thing I would mention about this is that I find it interesting that they're releasing SSL certificates as a indicator, a form of a network observable, which is not very common. I know Mandiant has done this with the APT1 report, but it's not a very common indicator. And this is probably the first mainstream one that I've really seen, publicly that's going to be refreshed on a regular basis. And I think it's interesting in that, I think we struggle, and probably other people struggle, in collecting indicator data and figure out how do I ingest this into some kind of system that I'm going to keep all of my indicators and observables so that I can push that out to my various devices that are going to look for this and help protect my enterprise and whatnot. So just another hiccup of, I wasn't expecting this. I've been looking for URLs and bad email senders, and those types of things are pretty commonplace in terms of indicator data, but SSL certificates haven't. So now some people are going to have to retool and think, oh, okay, I'm going to figure out how I'm going to store this in my database and things like that. So just another thing.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something you can go to your, if you have an IDS vendor that you're working with, to talk with them about it, or if you have a proxy on your interface to your enterprise, you can talk to your vendor that provides your proxy tools, and the onus is on them to really make this information useful in many cases. Right. All right.